Greetings everybody, it's Rob from Stage Tower Games, and we are here with another Marvel Champions tier list. I heard you guys like some tier lists, so we're here with another one. And this one is about the scenarios in Marvel Champions. You can check out my other tier list talking about the heroes and how I ranked all the heroes all the way up and including Mad Titan Shadow. Check that out, I'll post a link down below and somewhere here on the screen. And this one will be about the scenarios all the way up to and including Mad Titan Shadow, but this will not include Hood because Hood is not officially out yet. So some rules about this clarification. I am looking at the scenarios based on standard and expert, not heroic. And I'm also looking at them as they are intended to be played. So the recommended module sets that come with them. There are some scenarios that you can definitely make a lot harder with depending on what module set you put in there. So I'm just going to look at the ones that actually come in the play as it's supposed to be played. So with that, let's look at this list. And we may hop around a bit, we may not, we'll see. So right away, the first one on our list is Absorbing Man. Now, Absorbing Man was from the Rise of the Red Skull campaign. And the reason that I'm going to put him where he is, and I'm going to put him over here in the F, or otherwise known as the GGEZ tier, is Absorbing Man never really proves to be much of a challenge to me, or kind of his scenario. It's a cool scenario. I like the way they kind of did it, but normally you only struggle with him when you're trying to like push and get through the delay counters quickly. Otherwise, he's not that much of a threat. He can pretty much control him if you deal with the side schemes and stuff. Overall, he's not that terrible of an encounter, to be honest. So he's a pretty straightforward, easy encounter. We'll hop from that one to the Collector 1 from Galaxy's Most Wanted. Now, Galaxy's Most Wanted, this one obviously is a very controversial box, and it is one where we have, needless to say, a lot of discussion because this is a crazy encounter. The fact that he takes away your cards, puts them into the collection. You got to balance the collection along with balancing the minions you defeat with him. There's a lot. I'm putting him up in the A tier because while he is beatable, he definitely is incredibly hard. And there are some encounters, there are some heroes that just don't work for this encounter set. They will struggle greatly against the Collector. We're going to go over to Crossbones, also from the Rise of the Red Skull campaign. And Crossbones is the first one that we got in the Rise of the Red Skull campaign. Now for him, I'm going to put him up to a C. He's a bit, in my opinion, a bit tougher than Absorbing Man. And that's only because Crossbones, if you are overconfident, Crossbones can punish you a lot more. Once he gets his weapon attachments on, if you are not paying attention, he can do 5-7 damage, no problem. He has his Raid the Armory card that lets him dig through his deck for like the 1 or 2 weapons he has in his entire deck, which kind of, frankly, most likely will drill through his deck anyway and give you the full acceleration token. So I feel like I've lost more times to Crossbones than I have to Absorbing Man, personally. I'm going to skip over a bit and I'm going to head back since we're on the topic of some heroes. I'm actually going to go to Rhino, because I think Rhino needs to go and join his friend Absorbing Man in the GGEZ tier. I don't think anyone will be surprised by this ranking. Rhino is the first scenario that we got in the core set, and he basically is rather straightforward. He's a big guy, he hits, there's barely any schemes. He comes with the bomb scare scenario, and the bomb scare scenario doesn't really do much. I mean, there are ways you can make him definitely harder with additional encounter sets, but as is, he's pretty much the intro scenario. There's not much there, personally. Drang, I'm also going to put in the C tier, joining his friend Collector in the first scenario in a campaign one. And the reason for this is, Drain, when you first encounter him, might be a bit of a shock. And that's because we're used to playing kind of up until before Galaxy's Most Wanted a specific way. Drain gives us the two threat per player scheme. There's a campaign card scheme. He has tons of minions. He has the environment of the Badoon ship. And there's a lot going on there that at first glance can overwhelm you quite easily. However, once you start to learn how you have to play Galaxy's Most Wanted, he's a pretty standard, fair, kind of not that bad. Which brings me, of course, to Ebony Maw, who will join his friend as well in this first one. And I think it makes sense that they would be in the same group. And that is mostly because Ebony Maw, kind of from the Mad Titan Shadow scenario, or the campaign, if you will, it's very similar to the old school ones. He had a lot of expel cards, a lot of surge, but overall, it's not too crazy. Compared to the rest of this list, I think Ebony Maw probably has less ways to destroy you, in my opinion. He may go up to a B, possibly, but I think C is where he should comfortably, in my opinion, sit. We'll hop around. Let's just keep chucking through, guys. Collector 2, otherwise known as Escape the Museum. We have Infiltrate the Museum, now we have Escape the Museum. Well, that's gonna actually go over to C, I hate to say it. It's a very cool encounter. If I was doing this based on fun, it'd probably be way up here. But in terms of difficulty, I don't think it's actually that hard. You're more having to deal with the threat and kind of rushing to get through before the Collector overwhelms you with his damage. And that's a cool mechanic. It's a cool way they did the encounter, but overall, I don't feel it's too difficult compared to some of the other ones that may be on the list in terms of stuff that it's going to throw at you. If you can time it out right, if you can play correctly, overall, not bad. Hela from the Mad Titan Shadow. Well, Hela is going to go in A. And the reason I'm putting Hela at A is Hela scenario, in my opinion, is really cool. The way you have to kind of fight your way through the world, basically. Kind of go through the different scenarios, the side schemes, and have to fight, a minion, get the scheme, unlock another one to go rescue Odin. That's a very cool mechanic. But until I played it, I didn't realize how scary it can actually be. Because once you get to that last scheme to kind of free Odin and get to the way there, Hela starts to get pretty scary. She has more health. Her attacks are getting higher and higher with each side scheme. Her encounter cards get higher and higher with each side scheme that you take out. To the point where she can start to attack and scheme for 5+ every time. And if you're not careful, that combined with some of the more bigger boost icons on some cards, you can very quickly die or scheme out against Hela very quickly. So that combined with the fact that her attachments don't fall off unless you knock her out, means she's definitely one you have to be careful when you push her into that third stage, or you might have a really, really bad time. Speaking on the A train, we're going to put Kang the Conqueror. Now, for Kang, those that may have been like me, I wasn't that familiar with Kang when Kang had come out as an encounter set. Obviously now we've, spoilers for those of you that have watched Loki or know about Quantumania, Kang's definitely going to make an appearance in the MCU with Jonathan Majors. But overall, Kang himself, in my opinion, is one of my favorite encounters. And a good one to kind of set yourself as like a testing ball. What I mean by this is, Kang's encounter has, a basic villain kind of for stage 1. Stage 2, you kind of split players out. You have different Kangs. One's really good at attacking, one's really good at scheming, and they have different abilities. And then you kind of combine together for that final Kang, which hits like a Mack truck, especially with Future Weapon. Is quite scary. So it gives you all different things to deal with and kind of have to play against, and it's really good. Now, the only thing it suffers from personally is the fact that there is no real punishment to King 2. Most people probably do the tactic where you purposely fail stage 2, so that way you get the King's Dominion encounter card, which causes you to, he takes no damage while it's out, but it gives you a turn or two to build up so that when you flip to stage 3, you can just start to go in. Other than that, in my opinion, it's a really solid encounter and a solid scenario pack in general, in my opinion. Claw. Good old Claw. Now, Claw is going to be here in the C group. And the reason I'm putting Claw here is we had Rhino, who was the first snare that we got in the core set. Claw was the second one. He's a bit tougher, bit harder. He kind of starts to show you how fast you can play a villain. He draws double cards whenever he attacks. He has some annoying cards in his encounter set. And he's very good at burning through his deck pretty quickly to give you acceleration tokens. And if you're not prepared for that, he might be a shock for new players. Other than that, I don't feel like, compared to some of the ones that we'll see up here in BA and Insane, I don't feel like he's anywhere near those in terms of difficulty. Speaking of those, Loki. Loki is going to be our first one up at the top, the Insane tier. Loki is the final villain for Mad Titan Shadow, and he is, as I put, insane. The encounter is incredibly rough. The Infinity Gauntlet plus his deck plus the Enchantress and the Frost Giants give you annoying minions. Not that many minions, so Space Stone can quite quickly burn through the deck. He has many cards that flip through his different types, and 2 of the 5 types have Stalwart, so it makes it tricky to stun or confuse him because he can easily flip it out. And there's a lot going on in that set. Plus the amount of health he has. On 2-player, it's 40 per Loki. So that is quite a bit to deal with from one person. And that's 80 damage you have to do for standard, 120 on expert. Combined with everything else going on, it is a tough encounter in my opinion, and a real challenge. Mutagen formula. Mutagen formula is before we had, so when we had Mutagen formula, I would have probably put it up in Insane. But since then we've had some, Galaxy's Most Wanted, we've had Mad Titan Shadow, and because of that, I'm putting it down to an A. It's still incredibly crazy encounter. The Mutant Formula 1 is from the Green Goblin pack, and the minions in this one are quite intense. The Goblin Soldiers, the Goblin Knights, Monster are all beefy minions that get in your way. Goblin himself has various cards that boost goblins or get stronger depending on how many goblins are out there. Even the Goblin Guards aren't that big of a threat, but they have guard, and there's quite a few of them, and that also is an issue. On top of all that, Goblin himself gives you encounter cards when you reveal him, and as a result, you'll have that 1 or 2 turns, depending on what difficulty you're playing in, where you're gonna be, you're gonna have 3-4 encounter cards to flip over, and if you can survive that, you have a good chance. But there's many games that can go all the way to the bin if you flip over like 2 or 3 minions, and it just becomes a mess of a board state. Before we got Galaxy's Most Wanted, in my opinion, Mutagen and Kang were probably the 2 toughest encounters that we've ever gotten. Nebula. What can we say about Nebula? Insane. I don't feel like anybody will complain about this one, especially if you play Nebula Expert. Nebula scenario is probably one of the somewhat entertaining, but also probably one of the most frustrating scenarios to play against. The reason for this being, Nebula has this special ability, and I'm not talking about in-game, I'm talking about metaphorically, where she can ruin the game no matter what you do. There are so many ways I've seen people talk about it, I've seen stories about it, where people have literally had a clean board and Nebula just starts surging her cards, and next thing you know, she's got like 3 attachments on, there's side schemes, and it's crazy. And there was nothing you could do about it. I've mentioned this before in some of my past videos. Nebula's surge ability is just through the roof, combined with the fact that you pretty much have to play with Milano down because you have to keep track of the evasion counters on her ship. Many players, the first time they play Nebula, they kind of underestimate the ship, and then once it flips and goes crazy, they realize how bad it is to ignore Nebula's ship. So that combined on top of that, the space pirates that she has, which can knock cards off your deck from the game or your hand, this is more of a nuisance as well. Nebula is probably one of the more frustrating scenarios to actually play against. Red Skull. Now, Red Skull is going to be our very first scenario to actually put herself in the B tier. And the reason why I'm giving Red Skull a B is he's a bit tougher than some of the ones down below. He has the sleeper, he has his own side scheme deck. If you're not careful, Red Skull can be a bit dangerous. Depending on how you play the campaign, you may have like the campaign upgrades to kind of give yourself an advantage, and that can help a lot. But overall, I think Red Skull can be a bit of a danger if you're not careful for Red Skull. He's a pretty solid encounter. He's a good boss encounter for the first box. But otherwise, not much really there besides showing the unique mechanics you can play with him. Speaking of unique mechanics, Risky Business right after him puts us at also a B tier. Now, Risky Business is the Green Goblin scenario when he flips between Norman and Goblin. The scenario is at a B because it's not that hard of an encounter per se. What makes it tricky is the fact that you have to time the flip. And that's because every time he flips to Goblin, he does damage to you. Now, that damage I believe is indirect on stage 1 and stage 2, and I believe it's direct on stage 3. So you gotta be careful about that. And that damage, if you're not careful, could kill you or set you up to be killed if you're not prepared for it. Unfortunately, it loses some difficulty because you can kind of prepare yourself, you can kind of set yourself up depending on what stage he's in. So he's a good encounter, but like I said, be middle of the road, like a bit more preparing and planning than some of these. Like all the ones down here on C tier, you can pretty much beat with a kind of a standard deck build. Up here, you may need to start, you know, planning a bit more towards the scenario itself. Ronan the Accuser. Well, everybody who probably stayed around for this video and watched the Nebula description probably knows where Ronan's gonna go. In the insane. And this is insane / unfun. Sorry, Ronan is probably one of the most frustrating scenarios ever to play against. Flat out. I just call it as it is. I don't care what you want to say. Even with the errata or some, I don't know, they changed the rule that you don't have to use the campaign card for him. Whatever. He's still annoying. Sorry. Fanaticism is a ridiculous card that makes it no fun. He, for the final encounter, is actually pretty boring, to be fair. Like, Red Skull was more interesting, but was easier. Loki is crazier in terms of the stuff going on, and because of the mechanics, he's a bit harder. Ronan just hits hard and often, and that's all he does, is he just hits you with his hammer and makes you regret your life choices. And he's a tough encounter. Standard, expert, whatever you want to play him on. Standard's a bit easier, but expert is very tough. The encounters that you're basically playing heroic 1 anyway at that point, because he off the campaign card that gives him a free draw every time. So it's making it tough all across the board. Taskmaster. Now, Taskmaster would be a B. However, Taskmaster for me goes to a C. And the reason of this is campaign mode. The scenario is a lot of fun. It's a cool way how they did it. The photographic reflexes, mimicry, all that. I like Taskmaster. He's a cool villain. You know, ignoring what was in the Black Widow movie and what they did to him in that movie. But the reason why I put Taskmaster down to a C is the capture by Hydra cards in his encounter set. You get to save 4 heroes, Shang-Chi, Elektra, Moon Knight, and White Tiger, and they are just really overpowered. They are really solid heroes. They're 0 cost. They have amazing stats, amazing abilities, and they can help you easily win the game if you get 2 or 3 of them out, no problem. Besides that, it's just playing around some of the damage from his set, and it's pretty straightforward. He's not that hard in that sense. Thanos. I am putting Thanos where he rightfully belongs, up in the top of the insane tier. Thanos is hard because he's kind of like Ronan, but slightly more interesting. Where all Ronan did was he punched you in the face with his hammer. Thanos at least punches you, but kind of uses the gauntlet, and you almost feel more like Thanos should be this. He has permanent stalwart, so you can't stop him. He's going to be swinging. He's going to be activating stones constantly that really mess you up. He has the Black Order as his scenario, as his encounter sets. So he has Corvus, Proxima, Ebony, Black Dwarf, and Supergiant all in his set. And they are all beefy minions that have annoying effects. And I think most of them have annoying boost abilities as well. And of course, you cannot talk about the Thanos encounter unless you talk about balance the scales, which is probably one of the most coolest and scariest things you can do in the game. Balance the scales is the main scheme 2 for Thanos. Spoiler for those of you, but if you've watching this, you probably have played this or do not care about spoilers or have seen it. Doesn't matter. It states on 2A, if he reaches this stage, you shuffle your discard pile into your deck, then you take the top half of your deck and you remove it from the game. He snaps your deck away. On top of this, if you're playing campaign mode for the Hela and Loki scenarios, the top half of your deck starts in the discard pile right away anyway. So it's really bad to get snapped. Really bad. Now, he's a more interesting, and I feel like it just could be biased. I feel like Thanos should be this kind of overpowering force, where Ronan just didn't, I don't know, something about Ronan just didn't jump at me like that. But Thanos is a tough encounter. He has a lot of health, and he can definitely be a strong challenge. So, definitely deserves the proper rule at Insane. This Avengers Tower symbol, you may be wondering, well, there's no Avengers Tower scenario. Technically, this is my way of doing the Tower Defense scenario, the Corvus, Glaive, and Proxima Midnight one. This one I'm putting over at B. It's a lot more fiddling than these ones. C, like I said, C is all pretty straightforward. B is when you start to have to plan stuff out. Corvus and Proxima have a lot going on in that encounter. You have to take them both down at the same time. They switch their activations. They do damage to the tower indirectly, depending on what cards flip over. They also have kind of learned in the Mad Titan Shadow campaign that they have cards that actually punish you if you block with allies, where they'll actually do damage to the tower. And it's very quickly, if you're not careful, the tower to take damage and get flipped. So this scenario requires a bit more planning, and they can be quite hard if you're not prepared for it. And there's a few surprises in that scenario, in my opinion. Ultron. Ultron, if you had asked me when we made this list, if we made this list back in like the core set, early days of Marvel Champions, he would be up here. But unfortunately, Ultron has kind of rusted a bit. And he's rusted all the way down. See. And the reason for this is, back when Ultron came out, there weren't that many good AoEs. We had like, I think, She-Hulk, Black Panther, and like Squirrel Girl. And there really wasn't many ways to deal with the different, if you got overwhelmed by drones. These days, there are a lot more cards out there that can ping drones off, that can do 1 damage here and there, that frankly, it makes him a bit weaker. Ultron, when he came out in the core set, was really good in counter. He was really good at scheming, he was really good at doing damage. He had attachments that made him really annoying, and he had some minions that kind of helped boost his drones and stuff that also made him a bit tough. So he was a tough encounter in the core set. Unfortunately, he's kind of dipped down quite a bit and quite drastically since then. Wrecking Crew. Now, Wrecking Crew might be one that might be somewhat controversial. I'm putting Wrecking Crew at B. It's one of my favorite encounter sets. It really is. I like this encounter. It's a lot of fun. I know some people don't think it's that card, and it really isn't on paper. What makes Wrecking Crew shine to me is the fact that by not changing any cards, because there's no encounter sets, there's no obligations. I don't even think the standard or expert cards. What makes it so interesting is the fact that depending on how you play Wrecking Crew will change how the game plays a lot. You may take out, Thunderbolt and then Power Driver and then Wrecker, then you're left with this insane bulldozer who's just gonna stampede at you with tons of damage. Or you may take out everybody else except Wrecker, who's then constantly doing damage. He's doing indirect damage with his flip. Not indirect, direct damage, sorry. And you have to block him or he gets more attack power. All this stuff happens. You may say you're playing a hero who has lots of upgrades. Or maybe you want to get rid of Power Driver first because Power Driver gets rid of your upgrades. Maybe you're playing someone who likes to basic attack a lot, or just attack in general. Zola, well, not Zola, Thunderball stuns you a lot. So you gotta be careful about that. Now, the fact that depending on how you play it, it can be a lot of fun, and that's what I like about this encounter, in my opinion. It's a lot of fun. Speaking of Zola, that brings us to the very last one we have. And Zola himself will be going in B. The reason I'm putting Zola here in B is Zola can actually be a bit of a nuisance scenario. He's got quite a few pesky minions. He has attachments for the minions that make them tougher and annoying. He has a permanent retaliate, so you gotta be careful. Like, you can't poke him a lot or with a lot of allies because they'll be taking damage a bit. He's not crazy by any means in terms of insane or A. And he's not a total pushover in my opinion. He's definitely a very unique encounter and actually can prove to be quite a good challenge for the rise of the Red Skull campaign. Now, be careful, obviously if you're playing campaign mode, you may have picked up the laser cannon, which can help blow through if you get swarmed by minions. But overall, I think he's a decent encounter, and he's not that terrible in terms of crazy mechanics. So, there you have it. I'm gonna move up there. So there you have it, the tier list for the Marvel Champion scenario tier list. What did you guys think about this tier list? Do you guys have any? Do you guys think anything here is grossly wrong? Let me know. I don't think so. I think it's pretty safe to say that these ones are the ones that can be pretty pushover. C is a pretty standard encounter you can face through. B, you might start need to plan a bit more. Then A, and insane, you have to really figure out how to beat those encounters properly. So let me know in the comments down below, and I hope you guys are enjoying these Marvel Champions videos. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more content and share the video. Let your friends know, let people know. The more content we can get, the more support we get, the more I will be able to make for you guys. So thank you for everything, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this video.